The Apache elder raised her walking stick toward the desert sky. Her voice cut through the heated voices of the tribal council like wind through canyon stone. The law of Iyadesi has been spoken. The black woman who carries iron and the son of Yazi are bound by sacred debt. They will join as husband and wife before the moon dies, or both will carry the stain of broken spirits. Celestine Beauregard stood in the circle's center, dust coating her dark skin like war paint. Her twin colts still held the heat of recent firing. Around her, Apache voices rose and fell like competing storms. Some nodded with the weight of ancient law. Others spat words she didn't need to understand. Beside her, Iyana Yazi struggled to his knees. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage she'd wrapped around his shoulder 3 hours ago. His black eyes found hers across the cultural divide that stretched between them like a canyon neither had asked to cross. Neither spoke. The language barrier stood as solid as the desert mountains surrounding the camp, but understanding passed between them anyway. Trapped. Both of them. By law, by circumstance, by the simple act of her choosing to save his life instead of letting him bleed out under the unforgiving sun. The elder woman, Nalnish, lowered her stick. The voices quieted. 28 days, she said in English learned from decades of unwanted treaties. 28 days to prepare your hearts for what the spirits have decided. Sells felt the weight of every eye in the circle. These people saw her as something other, something that didn't belong in their sacred space. She'd felt that weight before in different places from different faces. The feeling never got lighter, but this was different. This wasn't just rejection. This was binding. 3 days earlier, she'd been tracking Daniel Copper Dan Mulligan through the same desert that now held her future hostage. The outlaw carried a $500 bounty and something more valuable: information. The last person to see her brother Tobias alive worked in Copper Dan's crew before disappearing into the territorial prison system. Every lead she'd followed for 2 years pointed back to Copper Dan. Every whispered name in every saloon. Every wanted poster in every sheriff's office. He was the thread that might lead her to Tobias, or at least to the truth about what happened after they were separated on that Virginia auction block a lifetime ago. She'd found Iyana Yazi bleeding into the red earth instead. The Apache man had taken 2 bullets, one through the shoulder. Another had grazed his ribs, leaving a track of torn flesh and ruined buckskin. Whoever shot him had left him for dead in the shade of a Joshua tree, probably figuring the desert would finish what they'd started. Sells could have ridden past. Should have. Copper Dan's trail was growing cold with every hour she delayed. But something in the way Ayana's hand clutched a medicine pouch made her dismount. Maybe it was the memory of her own desperate moments when strangers had chosen to help or harm. She'd used half her water supply cleaning his wounds, torn strips from her spare shirt for bandages, fed him willow bark tea for the pain while he drifted in and out of consciousness. He'd spoken Apache words she couldn't understand, but his tone carried gratitude. By the time the Apache riders found them, she'd managed to get him conscious and sitting upright. To them, it looked like something else entirely. A black woman with a wounded Apache man, guns drawn, blood on her hands. The riders had spoken fast, angry Apache among themselves, before binding both her and Ayana with rawhide. They'd confiscated her weapons with the reverence of men who understood quality steel. Then came the long ride to the winter camp, where the tribal council waited with laws older than the territory itself. Now Nalnish stepped closer. Her weathered face held the kind of wisdom that came from surviving decades of impossible choices. "You do not understand our ways," she said to Sells, "but you acted with honor. The debt of life must be paid with life, not death. Life shared." Sells found her voice. "What if I refuse? Then you leave Apache lands forever. And he leaves with you, both marked as spiritually unclean, both without people to call home." Jana spoke then, his English careful but clear. "I did not ask for this binding." "The spirits do not ask," Nalnish replied. "They decide." The crowd began to disperse, leaving Sells and Ayana alone in the circle's center. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows that danced like the uncertain future stretching ahead. Yana struggled to his feet, favoring his wounded side. She'd done good work with the bandages, but he needed proper medicine, rest, time to heal. "You saved my life," he said. "Don't read too much into it. The law is the law." "Whose law? I never agreed to follow Apache customs." He studied her with eyes that held depths she couldn't read. Pain, yes, but something else. A kind of recognition that made her uncomfortable. "You are alone out here," he said, "like me." "I'm not alone. I have work to do." "What work brings a woman with guns into Apache territory?" She hesitated. Sharing her mission meant sharing her pain. Trusting a stranger with the one thing that kept her moving forward through each empty day. But maybe trust was exactly what this impossible situation required. "I'm hunting a man named Copper Dan Mulligan. He might know what happened to someone I lost." Yana's expression changed. Surprise replaced wariness. "Copper Dan shoots Apache families trying to cross into Mexico. Sells their children to work gangs. You know him?" "I know his work." Silence stretched between them while the implications settled. Their separate hunts might not be separate after all. 28 days, Sells said finally. 28 days. "What if we make a deal?" The deal was simple. 28 days to track Copper Dan through territory that wanted them both dead. If they succeeded, maybe the tribal council would see their partnership as something more than spiritual law. If they failed, they'd face that choice when the moon died. Sells adjusted her gun belt as they prepared to leave the Apache camp. The weapons felt familiar in her hands after 2 days of forced separation. Nalnish had returned them with a look that said she understood their necessity, even if she didn't approve. Yana mounted his horse with careful movements. The shoulder wound still pulled at him, but he sat straight in the saddle. Pride, she thought. The kind that got men killed or kept them alive, depending on the day. They rode east toward the borderlands where civilized men did uncivilized things. The desert stretched before them, red earth and scattered sage under a sky that promised heat. Neither spoke for the first hour. The silence felt heavy with unasked questions. "Tell me about Copper Dan," Sells said finally. "He runs stolen children south to mining camps, pays Apache trackers to find families crossing into Mexico." Yana's voice carried weight beyond the words. "Some of my people take his money. And that bothers you. Hungry people make desperate choices." She understood hunger. The kind that gnawed at your belly and the kind that ate at your soul. Both made people do things they'd never forgive themselves for. By evening, they'd reached the ruins of an old way station. Adobe walls crumbled back toward earth. The roof had collapsed years ago, leaving timber bones against the darkening sky. They made camp in what had once been the main room. Sells built a small fire while Ayana tended to their horses. He moved efficiently despite his injury. Every gesture spoke of competence earned through necessity. She found herself watching the way his hands gentled the animals, coaxing trust from creatures that lived by wariness. "You know these lands," she said when he settled across the fire from her. "I scout for the army sometimes." He stared into the flames. "Try to prevent misunderstandings." "Does it work?" "No." They shared jerky and water in silence. The fire crackled between them, throwing light that flickered across faces marked by different struggles but similar determination. Beyond the ruined walls, coyotes began their evening songs. "Why do you hunt Copper Dan?" Yana asked. The question hung in the air while she decided how much truth to share. Trust was a luxury she'd learned to ration carefully. "He knew someone I'm looking for, my brother." "Knew?" "No, knew. Does it matter?" Yana studied her across the flames. His dark eyes reflected the firelight and something deeper, understanding maybe, the recognition of someone else carrying weight they couldn't set down. "Family matters," he said. "Does it?" "It's all we have." That night she dreamed of Tobias. 8 years old, crying as strange hands pulled him toward a different wagon. She'd fought the chains until her wrists bled, screaming his name until her voice broke. In the dream, she could almost reach him. Always almost. She woke to find Ayana adding wood to the fire. Dawn was still hours away, but neither of them seemed interested in sleep. "Bad dreams?" he asked. "The usual ones." He nodded as if he understood what usual dreams looked like for people with their kind of past. Maybe he did. The next day brought them to Esperanza, a border town that existed to serve men with flexible morals and ready cash. Saloons outnumbered churches 5-1. The sheriff's office looked like it hadn't seen use in months. Eyes followed them down the dusty main street. A black woman and an Apache man riding together drew attention they didn't want. Whispers trailed in their wake. "We need supplies," Sells said, "and information." They split up at the general store. Sells handled the supplies while Ayanna waited outside with the horses. The storekeeper, a thin man with nervous hands, kept glancing toward the door. "That your Apache?" he asked while measuring flour. "He's his own Apache. Folks around here don't take kindly to mixing. Good thing we're just passing through." She paid with silver dollars that spoke louder than his concerns. Outside, a small crowd had gathered around Ayanna. Not quite hostile, but not friendly either. Men with sun-weathered faces and hands that stayed close to their weapons. "You boys need something?" Sells asked, stepping into the circle. The crowd shifted, uncertain. A black woman with twin colts changed the dynamic they'd been building. "Just making conversation," said a man with a deputy's badge that looked official enough. "Don't see many of his kind in town." "Lucky for you, we're not staying." The deputy's hand rested on his gun butt. The gesture looked casual, but Sells had seen that kind of casual before. It usually preceded violence. "Might be you should move along now," he said. "Might be you should mind your own business." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Too many hands near too many weapons. Too much history pressing down on a dusty street that had seen its share of blood. Then Ayanna spoke. His voice carried quiet authority. "We're looking for Copper Dan Mulligan. Anyone who helps us find him gets paid. Anyone who doesn't, we'll remember." The crowd stirred. Money talked in border towns, and the promise of payment shifted the mood. "Copper Dan comes through every few weeks," said a man in a stained apron. "Runs goods south." "What kind of goods?" Sells asked. The man's eyes flicked between her and Ayanna. Understanding passed across his weathered features. "The kind that walks and cries." The truth settled over them like desert heat. Uncomfortable. Inescapable. When was he here last? 3 days ago. Headed toward Broken Mesa with a wagon. They left Esperanza with the weight of confirmation heavy between them. Copper Dan wasn't just a connection to her past. He was an active threat to Yana's people. "The children he takes," Sells said as they rode toward Broken Mesa. "What happens to them?" "Mining camps, ranches, some go to California. As slaves." "They don't call it that anymore." "But yes." The desert wind picked up, stirring dust devils that danced across the hardpan. The sky stretched endless above them, indifferent to human suffering. But they weren't indifferent, not anymore. "We stop him," Sells said. "Together." The word carried weight beyond partnership. It held the promise of shared purpose, shared risk. The beginning of something neither had expected when tribal law bound them together. Ahead, Broken Mesa rose from the desert floor like an ancient fortress. Somewhere beyond those red stone walls, Copper Dan was turning human misery into profit. They spurred their horses forward, two unlikely allies against the dying light. Broken Mesa cast shadows across the desert floor like fingers reaching toward secrets. They found Copper Dan's trail at the base of the red stone cliffs. Wagon tracks deep set from heavy cargo. Boot prints that told stories neither wanted to imagine. Sells knelt beside the tracks, reading the earth the way others read newspapers. 4 horses. 1 wagon. Recent enough that dust hadn't settled back into the wheel ruts. "They're moving slow," she said. Ayanna studied the mesa walls, searching for movement among the stone formations. "Heavy load." The words hung between them. Heavy loads had different meanings in their world. Sometimes it was supplies. Sometimes it was people who couldn't run. They followed the trail as it wound through narrow canyons where ancient waters had carved passages through living rock. The walls rose higher with each turn, closing around them until the sky became a ribbon of blue overhead. There, Iana pointed to smoke rising from a hidden valley beyond the next ridge. They dismounted and climbed the rocky slope on foot, leading their horses through loose shale that threatened to announce their presence with every step. At the crest, they belly crawled to peer over the edge. Below them, a camp sprawled across the valley floor. Tents and lean-tos clustered around a central fire pit. Men moved between the structures with the casual efficiency of a working operation. And in the center, a wooden cage built from scavenged lumber. Children's faces pressed against the bars. Apache children, 8 of them, maybe 10. Too young to understand why the world had turned cruel, old enough to be afraid. Sells felt her chest tighten. Tobias had been about that age when they'd last seen each other. Small hands gripping the wagon's side as strange men drove him toward an uncertain future. Beside her, Ayana's breathing changed. Shallow, controlled, the sound of a man fighting rage. "I know some of them," he whispered. "From where?" "Families I helped cross into Mexico. I thought they were safe." The words carried weight beyond simple failure. They spoke of trust broken, promises shattered, people lost because his help hadn't been enough. Sells studied his profile against the darkening sky. Pain etched lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The kind of pain that came from watching your efforts turn to ash. "It's not your fault, isn't it?" She didn't answer because blame was a luxury neither could afford. The children needed action, not guilt. They retreated from the ridge to plan. The camp held at least 15 men, too many for a direct assault. But camps had rhythms and rhythms had weaknesses. "Guards change at midnight," Sells observed after watching through her spyglass. 2 men on the cage. 1 by the horses. "We take them quiet, get the children out before anyone notices. And then we run." That night, they moved through the camp shadows with the practiced stealth of people who'd learned to survive by being invisible. The desert air carried sounds clearly, snoring from the tents, horses shifting in their picket lines, the soft crying of a child who'd given up hope of rescue. Iana reached the cage first. His hands found the rope knots that secured the door while Sells kept watch. The children stirred at his approach, recognizing something familiar in his face. "SHH," he whispered in Apache. "We're taking you home." One of the guards chose that moment to stretch and turn. His eyes met Sells across 20 feet of open ground. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then his mouth opened to shout warning. Her knife took him in the chest before sound could emerge. Clean, quick, the kind of death she'd learned to deliver without hesitation. The second guard spun toward the commotion. Gianna's war club caught him behind the ear. He dropped like a felled tree. "Go," Sells hissed. They herded the children toward the horses while the camp slept on, unaware that their cargo had sprouted legs and hope. The oldest child, a girl maybe 12 years old, helped gather the younger ones with the efficiency of someone forced to grow up fast. They were almost to the canyon mouth when shouts erupted behind them. Lanterns flared to life. Men stumbled from tents, reaching for weapons and boots in the wrong order. "Ride," Iana shouted. What followed was a nightmare chase through moonlit canyons where one wrong step meant death for everyone. The children clung to saddles and each other while horses picked their way over treacherous ground. Behind them, torches bobbed through the darkness as Copper Dan's men gave pursuit. They reached the main trail as dawn painted the eastern mountains gold. The children were exhausted but alive, free for now. "They'll follow," Sells said. "Let them." But they both knew pursuit was the least of their problems. 15 men didn't represent Copper Dan's entire operation. They'd cut one tentacle off a creature with many arms. They made camp in an abandoned line, shack 20 miles from Broken Mesa. The children huddled together near the fire, speaking soft Apache words that sounded like prayers. The oldest girl translated their needs to Ayana: water, food, reassurance that the nightmare was ending. "Their families?" Sells asked. "Dead, scattered. Some sold to other camps." The truth settled over them like desert cold. These children had no homes to return to. The rescue had saved their lives but couldn't restore what they'd lost. Sells watched Ayana tend to a boy's scraped knee with gentle hands. The care he showed came naturally, instinctively, the way a father might treat his own child. You're good with them. Children deserve protection. Not everyone feels that way. Then not everyone deserves children. She understood then why the tribal law had bound them together. Not just because she'd saved his life, but because they shared something deeper. A need to shield the innocent from a world determined to devour them. That night, while the children slept and Ayana kept first watch, Sells found herself staring into the fire and thinking about family. Not the blood family torn from her by slavery's violence, but the chosen family that grew from shared purpose and mutual respect. "We can't take them back to your people," she said. "No, too dangerous now. And we can't fight Copper Dan's entire network alone." "No." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. They'd saved 8 children but discovered a problem too large for 2 people to solve. Yet walking away felt impossible now that they'd seen the faces in that cage. "There's something else," Yana said finally. "What?" "The men in that camp, they wore army boots." The implication hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just criminal enterprise. It was sanctioned theft, dressed in official indifference and carried out with government resources. How deep does it go? Deep enough to make us inconvenient. Dawn would bring new challenges. Copper Dan's pursuit. The need to find safety for 8 traumatized children. The growing understanding that their mission had evolved beyond personal vendetta into something larger and more dangerous. But for now, they had this moment. A fire against the darkness. Children sleeping safely for the first time in weeks. The quiet satisfaction of having struck a blow against cruelty. Sells looked across the flames at Ayana's weathered face and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but recognition. The understanding that some partnerships transcended the circumstances that created them. 20 days remained until the moon died and tribal law demanded its answer. But the question was changing. No longer whether they could endure marriage, but whether they could survive what came next. Together, the children reached the Apache settlement as the sun touched the western mountains. Nalnish met them at the camp's edge, her weathered hands gentle on young faces that had seen too much. No words were needed. The rescued spoke their own language. Sells watched families embrace children who weren't their blood but would become their responsibility. The Apache way of survival: take in the orphaned, shelter the lost, build strength through shared burden. "They'll be safe here," Yana said. "And us?" His silence carried the answer. Their mission had marked them, made them enemies of men with resources and reach. They rode out before dawn, following fresh intelligence from the tribal scouts. Copper Dan's main operation lay deeper in the territory, where the desert met the mountains and jurisdiction became a matter of interpretation. The trail led them through broken country where ancient rivers had carved impossible landscapes from living stone. Red earth and scattered bones told stories of things that had tried to cross and failed. On the 3rd day, they found him. The ambush came at midday when the sun bleached color from the world and heat made the air dance. Copper Dan's men emerged from rock formations that had hidden their approach, surrounding Sells and Ayana in a circle of drawn weapons. Copper Dan himself sat his horse with the casual confidence of a man who'd planned this meeting carefully. Gray-bearded, sun-weathered, with eyes that held no warmth or mercy. "Miss Celestine Beauregard," he said, "you've caused me considerable inconvenience. Just getting started." "I doubt that." He gestured to his men, 8 of them positioned with military precision, too many for a gunfight, 2 spread out for escape. "You've been asking about your brother," Copper Dan continued. "Tobias, wasn't it? Sweet boy, reminded me of my own son." Sells felt the words hit her chest like physical blows, the casual way he spoke Tobias's name, the past tense that carried implications she'd spent years refusing to accept. "Where is he?" "Dead, I'm afraid. Colorado mining accident, must be 2 years now. Tunnel collapse. Very sudden." The truth she dreaded hearing finally spoken aloud. Tobias was gone. Had been gone while she'd spent months following false leads and desperate hopes across half the territory. The grief hit her like a flash flood, sudden and complete. All those miles, all those sleepless nights, all those moments when she'd imagined finding him safe somewhere, waiting for her to complete their interrupted story. "You're lying. I kept track of the boy, felt responsible, you might say. He talked about you right up until the end. His big sister who'd promised to find him." Copper Dan's smile held no warmth. "He died hoping you'd keep that promise." Beside her, Ayanna sat perfectly still. She could feel his attention focused on her, ready to follow whatever choice she made. Fight or surrender. Live or die in this God-forsaken place where dreams came to rot under the desert sun. "Now then," Copper Dan continued, "let's discuss your Apache friend here. Seems he's been interfering with my business arrangements." "I scout for the army," Yana said. "Nothing more." "Is that what you call it? My sources say you've been helping families avoid my collection routes, providing information about patrol schedules. Very helpful of you." The accusation hung in the air between truth and interpretation. Yana's work with refugee families wasn't secret, but it wasn't officially sanctioned either. People deserve safe passage. People deserve what they can pay for. Everything else is charity, and charity doesn't put food on my table. Copper Dan reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a leather portfolio. Documents tied with string, the kind of papers that carried official weight. "Speaking of charity, I have something here that might interest you. Records from the territorial archives. Seems your father had some interesting transactions during the winter of 1869. Yana's posture changed. Subtle but unmistakable. The kind of stillness that came from hearing your worst fears spoken aloud. "I don't know what you mean." "Sacred Apache artifacts, sold to private collectors in Santa Fe. Very valuable pieces, according to the documentation. Enough money to buy food for a starving band through the hardest winter in memory." The words fell between them like stones in still water, each fact creating ripples that spread outward, touching everything. "Your people don't know, do they? About their respected medicine man trading their spiritual heritage for bacon and flour." Sells watched Ayana's face and saw the truth written there. Not surprise, but confirmation. The guilt he'd been carrying had deeper roots than she'd understood. "He was trying to save lives," Ayana said quietly. "Of course he was, just like you're trying to save lives now. Noble intentions paving the road to practical compromise." Copper Dan held up the documents. "These papers would cause quite a stir in your tribal council, might even split your people right down the middle. Some would understand. Others would see it as betrayal of everything they hold sacred." The trap was perfect, elegant. Destroy Ayana's family reputation to save him, or preserve his father's memory by accepting whatever terms Copper Dan offered. "What do you want?" "Simple. You stop interfering with my operations. Provide me with information about Apache gold locations. Help me expand my business into new territory. And if I refuse, then these documents find their way to your tribal council. Your father's legacy becomes a cautionary tale about the corruption of tradition. Your family name becomes poison for generations." The desert wind picked up, stirring dust devils that danced between the horses. The heat pressed down from a sky bleached white by sun and distance. Sells felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, exactly, but something deeper. The hope that had kept her moving forward through years of searching and disappointment. Tobias was dead. Had been dead while she'd chased shadows across half the continent. All her determination and skill and stubborn refusal to quit had led her to this moment of absolute defeat. But looking at Ayana's face, she saw something else. A man facing the destruction of everything his family represented. His father's memory, his people's trust, his own identity built on foundations that might prove false. "Let him go," she said suddenly. Copper Dan raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, take me instead. I'm the one who's been causing your problems. He was just along for the ride." "That's not how this works." "Then make it how it works." She looked at Ayana, trying to communicate everything words couldn't hold. Gratitude for showing her what partnership could mean, regret for the future they'd never explore, understanding that some sacrifices were worth making. Go back to your people, she told him. Marry someone who fits. Live the life tribal law intended. No, this isn't your fight anymore. Yes, it is. The certainty in his voice surprised her. No hesitation, no calculation. Just the quiet conviction of a man who'd made his choice and wouldn't be moved from it. Copper Dan laughed. How touching, but neither of you seems to understand your situation. He gestured to his men. You're both coming with me. The Apache because he's useful. The woman because she's caused me trouble. We'll see how useful you both become when properly motivated. The circle of gunmen tightened around them. Too many weapons to fight, too little cover to run. The trap had closed completely, leaving only the question of how they'd face what came next. Together or apart, defiant or broken. The choice was still theirs to make. Copper Dan's main camp sprawled across a hidden valley where the desert met the mountains. Adobe buildings clustered around a central compound. Corrals held horses and cargo wagons. Smoke rose from cook fires that fed too many men for honest work. They'd been bound with rawhide that cut into wrists already raw from the long ride. Cells tested the knots as they were dragged from their horses. Professional work. The kind that held until someone wanted it to let go. Put them in the old storehouse, Copper Dan ordered. I'll decide what to do with them later. The building had thick walls and one door. Two small windows set too high to reach. The kind of place designed to hold things that didn't want to be held. They sat in the darkness, backs against opposite walls. The space between them might as well have been an ocean for all the good it did. I'm sorry, Sells said finally. For what? Getting you into this. I got myself into this. She could hear him working at his bonds in the darkness, methodical movements that spoke of experience with restraints, the sound of a man who'd been captured before and lived to escape. Your father, she said. Did he really sell tribal artifacts? Silence stretched between them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old shame. The winter of 1869 was the hardest anyone remembered. No game, no trade goods, children starving while the government promised supplies that never came. So he did what he had to do. He did what he thought was right. Some of the elders agreed, others never forgave him. And you? I understood why. That doesn't make it hurt less. She knew that particular pain, the way love and disappointment could occupy the same space in your chest. How protecting someone's memory sometimes meant carrying their sins. My brother used to say I'd find him someday, she said. Made me promise I wouldn't give up looking. Promises to the dead are the hardest ones to keep, or the easiest to break. Outside, men's voices carried across the compound. Orders being given, plans being made. The business of human misery continuing while they sat helpless in the dark. Hours passed, maybe days. Time lost meaning in the windowless space where sunlight never reached. They took turns sleeping, keeping watch for opportunities that never came. When Copper Dan finally appeared, he brought lanterns and documents. The papers from his saddlebag spread across a wooden crate-turned table. I've been thinking about our situation, he said, and I've reached a decision. Sells studied his face in the lamplight, the kind of controlled expression that preceded violence or worse. You're both more valuable alive than dead, but value requires cooperation. What kind of cooperation? The Apache will provide me with information about tribal movements, gold locations, anything that helps my business interests. Jana's bonds had loosened during the night, not enough to escape, but enough to move his hands. She watched him test the range of motion while keeping his expression neutral. And the woman will help me expand operations into new territory. Her reputation opens doors that stay closed to men like me. I won't help you hurt more people. You will, because if you don't, I'll make sure that every Apache child in this territory ends up in chains. Starting with the 8 you think you rescued. The threat hit like a physical blow, those faces around the tribal campfire, young eyes that had finally begun to trust again. You're bluffing. Am I? I know exactly where they are. Who's protecting them? How many men it would take to change their situation permanently. Copper Dan leaned forward, his smile holding no warmth. Cooperation, Miss Beauregard. It's the only currency that spends in situations like this. That's when Ayanna moved. The loosened bond slipped free as he lunged across the small space. His shoulder caught Copper Dan in the chest, driving both men against the adobe wall. The lantern fell, scattering burning oil across the wooden floor. "Run!" Ayanna shouted. Cells rolled toward the door as flames spread across the dry planking. Smoke filled the space, thick and choking. Outside, men shouted warnings and questions. She found her feet as Copper Dan's men reached the burning building. The door burst open, releasing smoke and confusion into the desert night. In the chaos, she spotted their horses in the corral. Their weapons hung from a post near the main building. 50 yards of open ground defended by men with rifles. Ayanna appeared beside her, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. The horses. The guns first. No time. He was right. Flames were spreading from the storehouse to nearby buildings. Men ran with water buckets and blankets trying to save what they could. In the confusion, two figures running toward the corral might pass unnoticed. They reached the horses as someone spotted them. Shouts erupted across the compound. Rifle shots cracked through the night air. Ayanna vaulted onto his horse bareback. No saddle, no bridle, just hands in the mane and legs gripping flanks. The way Apache warriors had ridden before white men brought leather and metal to the desert. Cells followed his lead, her horse responding to pressure and balance rather than equipment. They'd trained these animals well. Even stolen, they remembered how to run. The corral gate stood between them and open country, closed, barred, defended by two men with rifles who'd recovered from their surprise. "Hold on," Ayanna said. He drove his horse straight at the gate. The animal gathered itself and jumped, clearing the wooden rails with inches to spare. Cells followed, her mount trusting her enough to attempt the impossible. They landed in a shower of splinters and gunfire. Behind them, the camp burned orange against the desert night. Ahead lay 20 miles of broken country where horses could break legs and riders could disappear forever. They rode hard for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and pursuit. The horses were strong but not infinite. Eventually, they'd have to rest or risk losing their mounts entirely. There, Ayanna pointed to a canyon mouth barely visible in the starlight. Water and cover. The narrow passage led to a hidden valley where a spring fed cottonwoods that rustled secrets in the desert wind. They let the horses drink while listening for sounds of pursuit. "They'll follow," Cells said. "Let them. We know this country better than they do." But they both understood the larger problem. Copper Dan still held evidence that could destroy Ayanna's father, still commanded enough men to threaten the Apache settlement, still operated with the protection of corrupt officials who profited from human suffering. "The children," she said, "will be protected. My people aren't helpless. And your father's reputation." Ayanna sat beside the spring, washing blood from his face with water that reflected stars. "Some things matter more than reputation." "Like what?" "Like stopping men who steal children, like keeping promises to people who saved your life." She understood then what he wasn't saying. The choice he'd made when tribal law bound them together had evolved into something deeper. Not obligation anymore, but partnership freely chosen. "Copper Dan has resources, connections, more men than we can fight. Then we don't fight them all, we fight smart." "How?" "We take what matters most to him." In the darkness, his eyes held the glint of a plan taking shape. Dangerous, probably impossible, but better than running forever while children suffered and good people carried shame they didn't deserve. What does matter most to him? The same thing that matters to all men like him: money, and the power it buys. Dawn was still hours away, but already the eastern sky showed the faintest hint of gray. Soon, pursuit would resume. Trackers would follow their trail across the desert floor, patient and determined as hunting wolves. But for now, they had this moment. Water and shelter. The quiet satisfaction of having struck back. the growing understanding that their partnership had become something neither had expected when tribal law first bound them together. 18 days, Sells said. Until what? Until the moon dies and your people demand an answer. Yana looked at her across the small spring that reflected their faces in its dark surface. I already know my answer. They returned to the Apache settlement 3 days before the moon died. The rescued children ran to greet them, voices bright with joy that hadn't existed in Copper Dan's cages. Behind them, Nalnish waited with eyes that held questions and answers in equal measure. You carry the smell of smoke and violence, she said. We carry justice, Iana replied. The old woman studied their faces, reading stories written in dust and determination. Sells met her gaze without flinching. 3 weeks in the desert had burned away the woman who'd first stood in this tribal circle. What remained was harder, clearer, forged by purpose and tested by fire. Show me, Nalnish said. They spread their evidence across blankets in the council lodge, documents taken from Copper Dan's burning compound, lists of names and prices, army correspondence that proved the trafficking network reached from territorial capitals to mining camps in 3 states. The tribal council gathered as word spread through the settlement, men and women whose faces carried the weight of decisions that affected entire families. They examined the papers with careful attention, passing them from hand to hand while whispers filled the lodge. This changes everything, said one of the war leaders. This gives us weapons that don't require bullets, said another. Sells watched Ayana translate the documents for elders who read English poorly. His voice remained steady as he revealed the scope of the conspiracy that had stolen their children and sold their future to the highest bidder. Where is Copper Dan now? Nalnish asked. Gone, Sells said. His operation is scattered. The army has recalled the officers involved. Dead, worse, disgraced. The old woman nodded with satisfaction that came from seeing justice take unexpected forms. Sometimes destroying a man's reputation hurt more than destroying his body, and the children taken from other bands. Free. We gave the territorial governor enough evidence to make continuing the operation more expensive than stopping it. You have done well, Nalnish said. Both of you. The formal words carried deeper meaning. Recognition not just of their success, but of their partnership. The way they'd moved together through dangers that would have broken individuals traveling alone. The law of Iadesi, Sells said. Does it still bind us? Nalnish smiled with the expression of someone who'd watched this story unfold exactly as she'd hoped it would. The life debt was fulfilled when you saved the children. The spirits are satisfied. So we're free to choose. You have always been free to choose. The law simply ensured you would make that choice together. The ceremony took place at sunset when the desert sky burned gold and red above the mountains. Traditional Apache wedding rituals blended with custom Sells remembered from her grandmother's stories about slave quarters, where love survived despite everything designed to destroy it. She wore doeskin decorated with turquoise and silver, gifts from the tribal women who'd spent 3 days preparing garments that honored both cultures. Iana stood beside her in buckskin and beads that had belonged to his father, symbols of continuity that bridged past and future. Nalnish spoke words in Apache that needed no translation. Love, commitment, shared journey ahead. The promises people made when they chose to face an uncertain world together rather than apart. Do you take this partnership freely? She asked in English. Yes, they answered together. The feast lasted until dawn. Music and stories and laughter that celebrated not just their union, but the broader victory over forces that would have stolen hope from an entire people. Children played between the dancing adults, safe now in ways that hadn't been possible weeks earlier. Sells found herself watching Ayana as he spoke with tribal elders about the future. How to use their evidence to protect other bands. How to build networks that would make trafficking operations impossible to sustain. The conversation of a man who'd found his true calling in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. You're staring, he said when he joined her at the edge of the celebration. Just thinking. About what? About how tribal law is wiser than I gave it credit for. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something younger and more hopeful. Nalnish says wisdom often disguises itself as inconvenience. She's right. They walked together beyond the firelight to where the desert stretched endless under stars that had watched human struggles long before their particular story began. The night air carried the scent of sage and the sound of celebration slowly winding down. "What happens now?" Sells asked. "Now we build something new. Together. Together." 6 months later, their partnership had become legendary across the Southwest. Sells wore her twin Colts alongside traditional Apache jewelry. Ayanna had learned to navigate both worlds without losing himself in either. They worked as bounty hunters and tribal protectors, tracking down men who preyed on the vulnerable and ensuring that Copper Dan's network stayed buried. A newspaper reporter from back east found them in Tucson, drawn by stories of the unlikely pair who dismantled a criminal empire and married under Apache law. He was a thin man with nervous hands who seemed disappointed that their story contained more justice than violence. "How does a partnership like yours actually work?" he asked. "A former slave and an Apache scout, I mean. The cultural differences alone must be overwhelming." Sells looked at Ayanna across their campfire and saw her own amusement reflected in his dark eyes. After everything they'd survived together, explaining their relationship to strangers felt impossible. "Sometimes the best things come from the most impossible choices," she said. The reporter scribbled notes that would never capture the truth. How shared purpose could bridge any divide. How love built on mutual respect and common cause lasted longer than passion based on convenience. How two people who'd started as reluctant partners had become something neither could have imagined alone. That night after the reporter had left to file his story, they sat beside their fire and watched the stars wheel overhead in patterns older than memory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More children to protect. More criminals to stop. More ways to prove that justice didn't always come from courtrooms and official pronouncements. "Any regrets?" Yana asked. "About which part?" "Any of it, saving my life, following tribal law, marrying a man you barely knew." Sells considered the question while desert wind stirred the flames between them. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman alone, chasing ghosts across empty country. Now she was part of something larger, a partnership that had become a family, a mission that gave meaning to all the pain that had come before. "Just one," she said. "What's that?" "I wish it hadn't taken tribal law to show me what I was looking for." "And what were you looking for?" "Home. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there." Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.